Taoiseach, this week Owen Keegan raised the spectre of increased parking charges, increased rates, increased tolls in Dublin City Council because, as he saw it, of the underfunding of local government. In Dunleary Rathdown this week, the new Fianna Fáil, Green, Labour and Social Democrat controlled council increased rates by 3.5%, increased parking charges, cut, interestingly, given Green involvement, cut entirely the home retrofit budget, and cut the environmental awareness budget, and cut the community grants budget. Fairly astonishing, frankly. But naturally enough, people before profit opposed such a shocking budget and proposed an alternative, which is that the refund scheme for vacant properties should be limited to a year, so that you don't get a break for leaving a property empty, and which would actually put pressure on owners of property to open up empty premises, which blight towns like Dunleary and indeed many towns and village centres across the country. Now, the point I'm making there is, hasn't Owen Keegan got a point, and I don't always agree with Owen Keegan, that local government is chronically underfunded, that the property tax has not resolved, indeed assisted in any way in giving increased funding to local government, and that the consequences of that are going to be very, very damaging economically for town and village centres like Dunleary, like Dublin City Centre, and indeed like villages and towns across the country where small and medium enterprise are really struggling, that this is not the way forward, and what we need is additional funding from central government to go into local government to secure local Howland, services please, and the future of town and village centres.
Deputy Howland. I want to thank deputies again for their questions. Just in relation to school programmes, the budget for school building increased by 25% this year and will be roughly the same next year. The schools programme has involved the overall construction activity during 2018 and 2019 of 139 projects, ranging in value from 1 million to in excess of 20 million. There are also 327 projects with a project value of less than 1 million at construction during this time. The completion of 466 projects is expected to deliver more than 40,000 permanent, additional and replacement school places and replace about 600 prefabs. Progress of projects in 2020 is expected to involve about 60 new school building projects of a value in excess of 1 million going to construction next year, delivering 30,000 additional replacement school places next year. So 60 new projects next year worth more than €1 million and many more less than €1 million. So the schools programme is powering ahead. In relation to Palestine Educate Together National School, the new school is anticipated to be built and open for occupation and use in September 2021. And the school is currently in temporary accommodation in the former marketing suite. And I have spoken to the developers and the owners of that site to ask them to allow Palestine Educate Together National School to stay there for another year, because I know parents are concerned about the possibility that children might have to be bused to Broombridge again, and they wouldn't like that, and I support them in that. So I'm waiting on a reply from the landowner, but ideally we would like the school to be able to stay where it is until its new school is ready to be opened in September 2021. In relation to Edmund Rice in Castleknock, the site for that school was only acquired recently. There were delays in the transfer of the land, and there are issues around road access, and planning permission is yet to be sought and secured, so money is not a problem in that project, far from it. The delays are for other reasons. I think in terms of rent controls, as I've said before, I think the rent pressure zones and rent controls work for the people for whom they apply to, the hundreds of thousands of people who are renting and are staying in the house or apartment that they are renting, and they now have a guarantee that their rent increase each year will be somewhere between 0 and 4%. Where rent controls and rent freezes tend not to work is for properties that are new on the market to rent. and people who have to rent for the first time, young people renting for the first time, migrants coming into the country. And that's why we always need to bear in mind the impacts that rent freeze and rent controls have. They tend to work very well for people who are already renting, who already have a tenancy. They tend not to work and can even disadvantage people seeking to rent for the first time, and that's why we need to get that balance right. Just in terms of the comments that the CEO of Dublin City Council made, I'd point out what everybody in this House knows. Local authorities have lots of sources of income: government grants, the local property tax, commercial rates, development levies, rents, other charges that they impose. So they have a lot of flexibility around the money they raise and also the money they spend. The revaluation of Irish Water has had an impact, a negative impact on the Dublin local authorities and also on Waterford. But actually the vast majority of local authorities around the country, I think about 25 of them, have benefited from the Irish Water revaluation. And people will know that revaluations happen all the time, and some people gain and some people lose out. But local authorities and local councils have a responsibility to come in on budget, and they make decisions, and they have to prioritise. Just like anyone does a budget, they have to decide how much they're going to spend, how they're going to raise the money, and that's what being in charge and being in government is all about. And Deputy Boyd Barrett is quite correct. The decision that was made by Fianna Fáil and the Greens on Dún Laoghaire County Council was to increase business rates and to cut the budget for parks and climate action. And I think it is interesting to see that no sooner are Fianna Fáil and the Greens back in power, and they're doing exactly what they did when they were in government nationally, raising taxes, harming business, and not doing much for the environment. In fact, cutting back funding for climate action and parks in Dún Laoghaire, and that is the wrong decision in my view. They could have made other decisions around revenue, which they didn't make. In terms of building social housing, about 10,000 houses will be added to the social housing stock this year. I know a few years ago we were criticised at the time for leasing and buying a lot of those from private developers, and I understand the reasons for that criticism. The reason why that happened was because councils and affordable housing bodies just hadn't built up the capacity to build. That is now changing. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of social housing being provided this year will be new builds, companies contracted by the council or by affordable housing bodies. I think it's... Yeah, but it's not just local authorities, it's also affordable housing bodies. Whether it's, affordable housing bodies like the Ivy Trust, like Peter McVerry Trust, and they're funded directly by government.